Although few seem to have noticed it and fewer still are talking about it, the Republicans in Congress are actually working on a bill, the Financial Choice Act, that would strip away most of the substantive Wall Street reforms that we were able to get, the few we were able to get after the Great Recession not so long ago. In this video, we're going to break down some of the highlights of it, starting with this. It would weaken the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau by moving it under the control of the executive branch. Currently, it's an independent agency. It would be under the purview of the president from now on. And in fact, the president could unilaterally choose to remove the head of it, a power they don't currently have. Now, that is an organization, obviously, that has won major battles in terms of credit card fees and things like that. It protects the consumers when it comes to the financial sector. And we had a long battle to get it set up in the first place. Now, it might still exist under this, but it seems like it'd be partially defanged.
Well, if you have, anytime you have an Atwill employee, essentially, for a mayor or for a commissioner or for a president, they're not actually working for anybody. They're a direct representation of the president. So that's all it'd be now, is a complete mouthpiece for the executive branch if they pass this, for obvious reasons, that if they don't say exactly what the president wants them to say, well then goodbye, you're gone. So whenever you have appointments, it's all a moot point.
I also think people should just be kind of intrinsically wary that any of these big Republican initiatives that get bandied about have any real likelihood to get passed, because the Republican Party has shown itself to not be a coherent governing unit at this point, at least within Congress. We saw that with healthcare, we saw it with other issues, and then you had just yesterday, so you have Republicans in Congress working on this bill to deregulate Wall Street, and then just yesterday, Trump gave like a blitz of interviews, and at one point he said that he was considering reinstating Glass-Steagall and breaking up the big banks. Now, who knows if that rhetoric is actually tethered to anything of substance, but it still shows how complicated this process is, even within the GOP, to come up with some kind of unified policy program.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, but in his interviews, he also said that the current AHCA protects those with pre-existing conditions. So it's entirely possible that he has no idea what's actually going on, which just plays to your point. It's not coherent. And you're right. It's entirely possible that this could fail. A lot of their biggest legislative goals so far have failed. We were worried that the Obamacare repeal possibly could go through in this latest round. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. In this case, I think there's a higher chance, because I think there's fewer Republicans who are willing to go against it in this case. It's an issue that people talk about less. The public opinion isn't as strong in regard to it, keeping the protections, than I think something like pre-existing conditions and things like that.
But we should think about how this is all part of that system I'm always harping on about how they tie into one another. So for instance, with the housing bubble we had before in the deregulation, in that aspect, there were a lot of black communities that had up to 70% of their wealth taken from them. So then when you talk about how a system entirely oppresses, well, the point of these deregulations is to get profit from the poor to the rich. That is the entire point of deregulating it, to cut that out. So then you oppress people more and marginalize them more, calling thus need, obviously we need more police to come and control these poor people who are trying to actually get a piece of their pie.
It's a system that works quite well in that way.
You know, it's a lot harder to personalize kind of obscure financial regulations, as opposed to, say, healthcare, where lots of people know somebody with a pre-existing condition if they don't have one themselves. So I think you're right that there's a possibility that it could be easier to placate members of the Republican caucus who don't have to worry about constituents getting as agitated about this as they did healthcare. But at the same time, I think it's just generally people ought to be wary about how dysfunctional the Republican caucus is at this point when they talk about these proposals and whether they could actually be implemented in law.
I never underestimate the value of stupid.
Exactly. Or if it is actually passed, some of this might well not be in it. Yeah, that's entirely true. But just in case, let's go over a few more. And as we go through these, bear in mind that the organization that theoretically would be around to protect you after these changes, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, is not really going to exist afterward. But we have fun little bits like eliminating the Volcker Rule, which bars commercial banks from engaging in certain types of risky or speculative investments, and many people feel like it was that sort of behavior that contributed strongly to the Great Recession. You've got the weakening of the too big to fail tests currently in place for banks that could prove to be a systemic risk to the entire economic system. Also doubles the time between those tests and takes away any consideration of what are considered qualitative measures of whether a bank is too big to fail outside of just the bottom line. It also removes the ability of the federal government to liquidate banks that are judged to be too big to fail. So whether the test is there or not largely becomes irrelevant once they can't actually do anything about it. And on a personal level, it would allow banks and credit card agencies to increase debit and credit card fees, possibly in a large way. And look, there's a lot of people that day to day, that's how you interface economically with the world, is through debit and credit cards, and that money can really add up.
Yeah, speaking about sometimes too, with you think about the debit cards for welfare programs, for example, when they increase those transaction fees, those come out of those payments in a direct ciphering of benefits to those rich people. Again, it's all designed for this. It's so frustrating to keep seeing it in so many avenues.
Yeah, it's switching a little bit of welfare from the people who need it to the banks.
And actually, the issue with fees in terms of credit cards and debit cards, that actually is an avenue through which you could potentially personalize this sort of issue, rather than talking in abstract terms about regulation. And even the Consumer Protection Bureau is a little hard for an ordinary person to grasp the meaning of, but everybody kind of understands intuitively what increased fees on their credit card means.
Yeah, start talking about overdraft protection again. Like, we got that thanks to the CFPB. Like, we didn't used to have that. I was hit once by dipping down below. Oh my, the financial industry, the way, if you have a whole bunch of, I used to live on the brink every month. I grew up poor, and so if you dip down below the amount of money you have, they would reorient the timing of your purchases so that as many as possible trigger afterwards, so you get charged the fee as many times as possible. That is the sort of bullshit that used to be legal and thankfully right now isn't. But perhaps we're being too hard on them, because Representative Jeb Hensarling, Republican, says that we're getting it all wrong. There's a reason that they're going to be taking away these protections. It has nothing to do with banks. He says, regrettably, thanks to Dodd-Frank, too many garages in our nation are full of old cars instead of new startup small businesses. It's time for the bailouts to end. It's time to help small businesses on Main Street. Yes, because if I were to clear out my garage, which I don't have, and fill it with a startup, I'd be worried about capital requirements for massive banks. And so when I read that, I thought, well, that's interesting. He seems really passionate about this. I wonder if theoretically there's any financial reason that he'd be saying the sorts of things he did. And so I looked up the donor information for him for 2015, 2016. Those are his top donors: securities and investment, commercial banks, miscellaneous finance. And there you're talking about nearly $1 million, which is a gigantic portion of all of the money that Hensarling actually raised between 2015 and 2016. So take his comments with a big old grain of salt.
Membership helps fund the Young Turks. You know one great thing about that? That means we're not accountable to anyone but you guys. That's why we're strong together, because we built this show around you. Come build it even bigger and better at tytnetwork.com/join.